Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 most important breakout players for South Carolina in 2024. And Dill, the more I do this deep dive into South Carolina, the more and more I'm buying into this program heading into 2024. Now, you go back 6 months ago after the 2023 season, Spencer Rattler going to the NFL, Xavier Legette going to the NFL. And after what you saw in 2023, I was like, this is a team that's not going in the right direction. And then you dive into the South Carolina depth chart and say, this is kind of the year that Shane Beamer in his wins on the recruiting trail, you kind of expect to pay off. They have a ton of breakout candidates that are going into year 2, year 3 within this program. And if Shane Beamer can kind of get the best out of some of these kids, like this South Carolina team can be a really fun team in 2024, fired up to get into our 5 most important breakout players. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the South Carolina fans. As we've geared up talking about this program, you guys have showed a tremendous amount of support. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, Dale, let's get into my guy. I'll just kind of take the T-box. Lenore Sellers going into year 2 within this South Carolina program. And I think there are going to be a lot of casual college football fans, outsiders of this South Carolina team, look at South Carolina and say, what's the deal with the quarterback position heading into 2024? You obviously lose Spencer Rattler. And I think a lot of South Carolina fans are sitting there and saying, we got arguably one of the highest upside quarterbacks that you see in the SEC. And why I say upside quarterback, I mean, Lenore Sellers, the traits that this kid has, they're kind of next level, right? 6'3", 245. He's a tremendous athlete, a former soccer player at the high school level. He was a raw prospect coming out of high school. That's why he had that 3-star status. Dill, if Lenore Sellers puts it together in 2024 as a redshirt freshman, I don't think there's a single more important player to this South Carolina program than this kid heading into 2024.
Yeah, I think the interesting conversation around Lenore Sellers is what does he open up for this offense in terms of his ability to run and maybe some ability, frankly, to take some pressure off that offensive line, because you kind of look, that was their one issue, I felt like, or glaring issue on last year's tape. So again, I think if you have a guy who can slow defensive ends down, get more involved with the read option, maybe just again, slow guys down up front and give that offensive line some help. I think that goes a long way in solving a lot of stuff.
Yeah, because if you're an opposing defense, one, I think he helps in 2 ways. One, the run game's going to get better when you have a dynamic. I mean, this kid is not just a good run. He is a true dual threat quarterback that can get it going on the ground. And South Carolina is going to ask him to do that, right? He's 6'3", 245. We make the joke, I'm more worried about linebackers getting hurt tackling this kid than him getting hurt getting tackled. And you look at South Carolina and the struggles they had at times running the football, putting this offensive line in those 3rd and long situations. It was a really bad recipe for South Carolina in the 2023 year. You inject Lenore Sellers in. One, you kind of expect the run game to just get enhanced when you have another body in the backfield that can tote the rock. But I think more importantly, if you're an opposing defensive line and you are rushing the passer, you can't really just pin your ears back. I mean, this is a guy that you're going to need to spy. You're going to need to be disciplined in your run lanes. Didn't really need to do that with Spencer Rattler next year. So just having a more dynamic athlete in this South Carolina offense that has a big arm, that can push it down the field, I can't wait to watch this kid. I don't know if it's going to be great. I don't know if it's going to be bad, but it's going to be damn fun to watch a guy like Lenore Sellers play in the SEC. Fired up for this kid. And they're going to probably, at least in my mind, the second most important player on this team heading into 2024. It's the offensive line. I just went with Tree Babalede. I think I said that name right, Dill. I practiced that a couple times before we went live. Now, a guy like Tree, he started pretty much the whole season as a true freshman, wasn't even enrolled in spring practice last year. There were some growing pains. There's no secret about that. But if he can emerge as a really quality starting tackle for South Carolina in the 2024 year, that's a massive story. You talk about what cost South Carolina a lot of football games in 2023. I don't need to tell South Carolina fans what it was. It was the offensive line.
Yeah, Tree Babalede, to me, I mean, it feels like a little bit of a stretch calling him a breakout guy. Maybe you're bending the rules a bit, because I thought by the end of the year he was playing at a really high level. I thought that Clemson game against as good of defensive linemen as you'll see, guys like TJ Parker, I thought he looked really, really solid. And you're right. It did start off a bit rocky at times, but that would naturally be expected. A guy who was still probably had to slim himself down a little bit, get a little bit more athletic. And I think as he continued to build that, get confidence up at the college level, you saw him take off. But you're looking, you got other guys like Trovon Baugh, who again need to step up for this team, young guys. You're kind of right. I think at the end of the day, you look, I think you want some of these younger guys playing for South Carolina, even a guy like Josiah Thomas, I know people are raving about. So if he gets on the field, I want to see these young recruits Shane Beamer's been bringing through his program get out there and play.
That's the story. The story is, at least in my mind, it's Lenore Sellers and the young offensive line, right? Trovon Baugh. The South Carolina fans know how I feel about Josiah Thompson. I think this kid probably has, and Tree has a damn high ceiling. I think Josiah Thompson probably has the highest ceiling in terms of the athleticism and length that he has. Now, going back to the spring game, you saw the flashes. You didn't see the consistency. I think during fall practice, that's a massive storyline for Josiah Thompson. But you could sprinkle in Cam Pringle, another true freshman, Markey Anderson, going to be a redshirt freshman. There is talent on the offensive line. The biggest story for South Carolina is that young talent going to put it together in 2024. And if it does, like this South Carolina team, I know it sounds crazy, it's going to get better. If this offensive line gets better as well going into 2024. Last player on the offensive side of the football deal, we don't have any question marks about the running back. You can't really label Rocket Sanders a breakout guy. Let's take a look at the pass catcher room. And I don't know if this kid that has a higher ceiling on this football team than Nick Harbin. That's the most fascinating conversation about South Carolina. Lenore Sellers, tremendous high ceiling. Tree, Josiah Thompson, tremendous high ceilings. Nick Harbor, very high ceiling. Can he kind of put it together going into year two? And at least the way I look at it, there's some reason to believe that he does. I mean, you go back to Nick Harbor as a high school recruit, being a Michigan fan myself, I'm very familiar with this cat, played a lot of edge rusher during his high school days. I mean, he only caught 14 passes during his senior year of high school. This was a rather green pass catcher that made the transition to wide receiver. There was some reason to believe that he wasn't going to be a year one kind of guy. The speed and size going into year two, if he can be one of the best pass catchers in the SEC if he puts it together. Again, massive storyline for the South Carolina offense.
And you saw the flash of the ball skills in that Florida game and some of those moments where, again, you saw okay, there is something there. It's not just all raw athleticism. Like, there is a football player in that athlete as well. And that's the thing. If they get that, I think you hit the nail on the head. He is a monster difference maker. When you talk about what guys are going to drive, whether this team's 5-7 or 8-5, I think Nick Harbor is going to be as big as anyone because they need somebody to kind of be that premier wide receiver. And you brought in some nice transfer portal pieces, but I think Nick Harbor, you almost want to see him take the step and be the guy on this.
Yeah, that Miami of Ohio kid is getting a lot of buzz. And so you have some talent in the pass catcher room. You go back to last year, and it was Xavier Legette, and then it was kind of nothing. You know what I mean? It was kind of a one-trick offense in terms of that passing attack. Can they have just a little bit more well-rounded passing attack where you might have your stud in Nick Harbor, but you also have Gage. You also have Jared Brown coming from Coastal. Can you be a little bit more well-rounded in terms of your pass catchers? That's big time for South Carolina.
You always need that guy, I feel like, and Nick Harbor, you just look at the traits and the athleticism and some of the skill sets. He really does have the potential to really be that guy.
100%. The best version of this South Carolina team is with Nick Harbor being that true wide receiver one in the South Carolina offense. Going to the defensive side of the football, and I don't normally include true freshmen in these conversations, but I watched the spring game, followed this kid coming out of high school. It's got to be Dylan Stewart. And you look at South Carolina last year, kind of digging in, the inside of this South Carolina defensive line is going to be really good. It was really good last year. Now, the problem was last year, you look at the leading pass rushers in this South Carolina defense, it all came from the inside, right? Tonka Hemingway led this team in quarterback hurries. TJ Sanders was number 2. They're both coming back. You have Alex. I mean, this is a really good interior of the defensive line, but you look at the production that you had from your edge rushers, and it simply wasn't there. Dylan Stewart's one of those rare cats that as a true freshman he's more ready to come in and be a contributor, right? Nick Harbor last year just wasn't kind of that freshman. You knew he'd take a year. Dylan Stewart, I don't think needs that year. And after watching that spring game a couple of different times, you kind of get the feeling that he can come on and kind of just hit the ground running as being an elite pass rusher at the SEC level year one in this kid's career.
And you love the two transfers you bring in with Gilbert Edmond and obviously Kyle Kennard, but those are, to me, more your physical stand, play really good in the run. I think you're still going to be looking, frankly, for that Ferrari pass rusher. And you saw some moments from a guy like Brian Thomas, who, again, it's like, I mean, something's got to click a little bit more. You saw like games against Georgia where it was like, okay, there's enough rushes here where he does have that burst, that athleticism, that flexibility on the edge. But I didn't think you saw it consistently enough. They need to have one guy on the edge, I think, to complement what they're doing with their pass rush in the middle, where they can just really be dynamic, more as that true edge rusher. Because, again, Edmond and obviously Kennard are really, really good players, but I don't think they have kind of that athletic upside that maybe a Stewart or a Brian does.
100% agree, and that's kind of why I like how this edge room is going to play out. I mean, you have your high floor guys, Kyle Kennard, and a guy like Gilbert Edmond, who played really good for South Carolina in 2022 and just didn't get that much opportunity with Florida State last year. Those are your guys that just give you that high floor. Now, the ceiling of this team, again, going back to that conversation, what's the best version of South Carolina? That best version is Dylan Stewart being an 8+ sack kind of guy as a true freshman. And Dill, we're starting to see that type of stuff. Like, let's just be honest, a lot of these true freshmen are coming in physically developed, right? We just talked about Clemson, guys like TJ Parker. They came in, dominated year one. It's not as rare. I'd probably throw in Desmond Yu as another guy that has all the potential in the world to be an elite edge rusher. Can South Carolina get that in 2024? That's a really big storyline. Last player we got to talk about, and Dill, I'll just give you the T-box here. Demetrius Knight Jr., coming over from Charlotte, was a former quarterback prospect out of high school, played some really good football for Charlotte. And Dill, at the end of the day, it's hard to not see them upgrading a little bit from Stone Blanton last year. If Demetrius Knight Jr. can come in and give that solid running mate to Debo Williams, again, that's a reason this South Carolina defense in 2024 takes a massive stride in the right direction.
Because Debo Williams is your playmaker at linebacker. They need a guy to just be more solid. And I think Demetrius Knight, you get a little bit more athleticism than what Stone Blanton was bringing. But also hopefully better instincts in the pass coverage game. I thought the linebackers left a lot to be desired, frankly, in terms of how they handled zone coverage, man coverage. I think you kind of look at Demetrius Knight can play a little bit of that off ball, or not off ball, but like that outside linebacker play in space. I think that's going to be a big deal because, again, I think you still want Debo Williams being your guy in the box, making plays, allowing him to blitz, using him in different ways, but you needed much more steady play from their second linebacker. I think Demetrius Knight's in a much better position.
And I think Shane Beamer would agree with you. There's a reason that he went out and got a couple veteran linebackers to come into that room because the linebacker play last year it wasn't good enough. And Dylan, a lot of this South Carolina conversation, it comes down to these guys breaking out because again, why is South Carolina kind of quote unquote getting slept on heading into 2024? Because a lot of these guys that we just talked about, to the casual college football fan, they probably don't recognize the names like they did last year with Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette. And if these guys can kind of put it together, this is Shane Beamer's team now. Like all of these guys pretty much, besides some of the veterans on the defensive line, they were recruited by Shane Beamer. They were brought in by Shane Beamer. Now it's time to have that young talent put it together. And if they do, again, this South Carolina team is going to be fun. I'm not picking them to win an SEC championship, but they can win some big-time games in the SEC if some of this young talent does put it together in 2024. Team. We're going to talk a lot about this team throughout the summer. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.